Excuse me, sir, but this is my seat. As you can see on my ticket, this is 1A. We paid for first class.
Sir, I paid for this first-class seat. My boarding pass is right here.
You can sit in the back where you belong.
Tasha Thompson's heart raced as the plane's boarding call echoed to the crowded gate. She had hoped for a peaceful flight to visit her sister across the country, but the air was thick with tension. Her son, Xavier, clutched her hand tightly, sensing her unease. As they approached the aisle, she spotted the open seat, a middle row, just beside a man with an unapproachable scowl etched on his face. He glanced up at her, then down at his phone, clearly uninterested in offering any help. She slid into the narrow space beside him, careful not to jostle his arm. She hadn't expected a greeting, but she didn't expect the sharp, dismissive comment that followed either. "Don't bother me," the man muttered under his breath, flicking his wrist toward her. "Find somewhere else to sit." Tasha blinked, the words cutting through her like a knife. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden wave of humiliation washed over her. She couldn't do anything. She couldn't even speak up in front of her son. She glanced around, hoping someone would intervene, but no one seemed to care. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking as she raised a hand. "Could you please?" But the man wasn't done. "Go back to your own kind," he sneered, as if she wasn't even human. "This is a first-class seat. You don't belong here." Her stomach churned. She felt the sting of his words like a slap across her face. What could she do? What should she do? And then, as the flight attendants began their final round of checks, Tasha's mind flashed to a single, terrifying thought. What if she was more than just another passenger? Tasha Thompson tightened her grip on her son Xavier's hand as they stepped onto the jet bridge, the soft hum of the airport's terminal fading into a distant memory. They had arrived at the gate just in time, and she had managed to secure a first-class seat. Rare for a flight like this. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this moment of luck. A smooth flight would mean a peaceful start to her sister's wedding across the country. Xavier, his face full of excitement, looked up at her. "Are we going to see Annie now?" he asked, his words innocent and hopeful. "Yes, baby," Tasha answered with a warm smile, bending down to adjust the strap on his backpack. "We're almost there." They reached their row. The flight attendant stood at the front of the cabin, welcoming passengers aboard. Tasha quickly glanced at her seat assignment. Row 3, middle seat, right by the window. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. She guided Xavier toward their seats, scanning the faces around her. The passengers already seated were quietly absorbed in their own worlds, the usual flight tension humming in the background. Tasha pulled back the curtain between the first-class cabin and the rest of the plane and stepped toward the row. Her heart rate picked up slightly when she saw him, a tall man in his late 40s, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He had a faint sneer on his face as he glanced over at her, eyes narrowing just before he looked down again at his phone. "Excuse me," Tasha said, her voice polite but firm. "I believe that's my seat." The man looked up slowly, his eyes gliding over her as if she were an inconvenience. His lips curled into a thin smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Really?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like you got the wrong class of ticket." He pointed to the seat next to him, his fingers stiff and dismissive. "There's plenty of room back there." Tasha felt a sharp pang of humiliation, the sting of his words slicing through her composure. She tried to push it down, but it was hard not to notice the others around them. No one spoke up. No one looked away from their phones or books. The subtle agreement in the air, "This is not your place." She forced herself to hold his gaze, trying to steady the breath that had suddenly become shallow in her chest. "This is my assigned seat," she repeated, though she could feel her pulse thumping louder in her ears. The man sighed, slouching deeper into his chair. "I really don't think you belong here," he muttered under his breath. He didn't even look at her when he added, "Try the back, where people like you usually sit." Tasha's stomach clenched. She could feel the heat of his words spreading like fire, igniting old wounds she had long buried. She tried to steady her voice, but it was hard to find words that would make him understand. How could she explain what she felt? Wait and see. "Excuse me," she said again, her words quieter now. "Could you please move over?" The man didn't budge. Instead, he flicked his wrist as though dismissing her entirely, his gaze shifting back down to his phone. The silence between them grew thick, suffocating. Tasha looked around at the faces of the other passengers. A few avoided eye contact. Others pretended not to notice. Her eyes landed on a flight attendant further down the aisle. She caught his gaze, but he seemed to hesitate, almost as if unsure how to handle the situation. After a long, painful pause, the flight attendant turned his back, walking further down the aisle without intervening. Tasha felt a cold knot of anger twist inside her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but it wasn't just her personal humiliation. It was a realization that no one else cared. The feeling of isolation, of being invisible in plain sight, washed over her like a cold wave. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tasha slid into the seat beside him, her body stiff with tension. Xavier squeezed her hand in confusion, sensing his mother's discomfort. She leaned down, whispering to him, "It's okay, baby. We'll be fine." But Tasha didn't feel fine. She felt her heart pounding against her ribs, the humiliation biting at her skin. Was she supposed to just sit here, be invisible, and take it? Was this what flying first class was supposed to feel like? She glanced at the window beside her, the outside world slipping by unnoticed. The only thing that felt real right now was a rawness in her chest, the ache of something far deeper than this single moment. The man beside her continued to scroll on his phone, oblivious to the power of his words, the harm in his dismissal. The injustice wasn't just in his behavior. It was in the silence of everyone else around them. Tasha closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to breathe through the sting of it all. Her body tensed, the injustice building inside her like a slow burn. What would happen if I did something? She fought the urge to act out, to confront him, but the weight of her son's gaze held her back. She couldn't make a scene, not here, not like this. So she sat still, the silence in the cabin louder than any voice. And then, just as the plane began its slow ascent into the sky, she heard the quiet voice of the flight attendant again. This time, a different voice, one that carried authority. "Sir, I'm afraid you'll need to move. This seat has been assigned to this passenger." The words landed like a shockwave. Tasha looked up, unsure whether this was an act of mercy or if someone was finally standing up for her. But as the man slowly stood, a furious scowl on his face, her mind raced with a new question. Who was this flight attendant really? The man glared at the flight attendant, his face reddening as if he'd been wronged in some unspeakable way. Tasha sat still, her body tense, as she watched him grumble in frustration, muttering under his breath as he grabbed his bag. "You think you can just move me?" he sneered. "I'm not some whatever you think I am." His words trailed off, but the hostility lingered, filling the space between them. He jerked his suitcase from the overhead bin with more force than necessary, then stormed down the aisle, leaving a cloud of his bitterness in his wake. The flight attendant stood there for a moment, watching him leave with silent intensity. His uniform, neat and precise, looked out of place in the charged air between them. He didn't make eye contact with Tasha, but she felt a strange kind of solidarity in the brief exchange. The silence that followed seemed to expand, as though the whole cabin was holding its breath. Tasha turned to Xavier, who was watching the whole thing with wide eyes. He didn't fully understand the complexities of what had just happened, but he could tell something was wrong. Tasha's throat tightened, and for a moment, she wished she could explain it to him. Tell him why that man's words had felt like a weight on her chest. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, gently brushing a lock of hair from Xavier's face. "That man was rude, but we don't have to let him ruin our day, okay?" Xavier nodded, his small hand still clasped tightly in hers. "Are we going to see Annie?" Tasha smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, we are. Everything will be okay." She took a deep breath and tried to push the lingering sting of the man's words from her mind. It wasn't easy. Years of similar moments played in her memory, moments where she'd been ignored, dismissed, or outright disrespected. But this one felt different. Maybe it was because it wasn't just him. There had been others too, others who hadn't spoken up, others who had turned away. She glanced over at the flight attendant, who was now speaking with another crew member near the cockpit. There was something about him that made her want to know more. Who was he? Why had he stood up for me? Her mind buzzed with questions, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. The whole situation felt fragile, like walking on eggshells. The last thing she wanted to do was draw attention to herself, especially not in this moment. Not when she was trying to hold it together for Xavier. The cabin began to settle, the low hum of the plane's engines filling the silence as they reached cruising altitude. Tasha leaned back in her seat, staring at the window, lost in thought. The feeling of being alien in a space that was supposed to be welcoming weighed on her. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady her nerves. As the minutes passed, the flight attendants made their way down the aisle again, offering drinks and snacks. Tasha's eyes flitted over the options, but her mind was elsewhere. She was still processing what had just happened, still trying to make sense of it all. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said, his voice steady as he approached her row. His name tag read Thompson. Her breath caught in her chest. Tasha Thompson. The name felt almost too familiar. She glanced at the man, unsure if it was a coincidence or something more. He was the same flight attendant who had intervened earlier. He was the same one who had, in a way, protected her. "Would you like a drink?" he asked politely, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since the confrontation. There was something in his gaze that made her pause, something unspoken but meaningful. Tasha swallowed, unsure what to say. She wasn't ready for small talk, not after everything that had just happened. "Water, please," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded and moved on, but the brief exchange left her unsettled. Why did his name sound so familiar? Was it just coincidence that they shared the same last name? She shook her head, brushing the thought aside. It didn't matter. She wasn't here to dig into the lives of flight attendants. As the man walked away, Tasha caught sight of Xavier, who was fidgeting in his seat, his mind still trying to process what had happened. She gave him a small smile, brushing his hair out of his face. "Everything's okay, sweetheart," she said again, though this time the words felt less convincing. Tasha's gaze drifted back to the flight attendant, who was making his way down the aisle. Her heart raced as another thought struck her. What if I asked him about his name? What if I asked him about his background? But she quickly dismissed the idea. She couldn't draw attention to herself. Not now, not in this space. The flight continued, the hours passing in a blur. Tasha tried to focus on Xavier, who was now absorbed in a book, his small brow furrowed in concentration. But her mind kept returning to the flight attendant, to his intervention, to the way he had stood up for her. There was something about him that didn't sit right, something that felt significant. And just before the plane began its descent, Tasha overheard something that made her freeze. She wasn't sure if it was meant for her ears, but she heard the flight attendant speaking to the pilot as they stood near the cockpit. "And if she asks, we'll need to tell her everything. She'll know soon enough." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Who was he talking about? She instinctively leaned forward, trying to catch the rest of the conversation, but it was too late. The door to the cockpit shut, and the conversation ended abruptly. For a moment, Tasha sat frozen in her seat, her thoughts racing. Was this about her? Had the flight attendant been expecting her? Or was it just another coincidence? The unease she had been trying to ignore crept back into her chest, filling her with a sense of foreboding. She glanced at Xavier, who was now fast asleep, his head resting against her shoulder. But even his peaceful presence couldn't calm the growing tension in Tasha's mind. Something was going on, something bigger than she could grasp, and she was determined to find out what it was. The flight touched down smoothly, the wheels hitting the tarmac with a soft thud that sent a fleeting sense of relief through Tasha's body. She glanced down at Xavier, still peacefully asleep, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. She didn't want to wake him. He needed the rest. But something stirred within her, a growing curiosity she couldn't ignore. The conversation she had overheard, the flight attendant's odd behavior, it was all too much for her to dismiss. Who was this man, really? Why had he stood up for me? The passengers around her began to gather their belongings, preparing to disembark. Tasha took a deep breath and shook off the tension that had built up during the flight. She had to get off the plane and get to her sister's wedding, but the mystery that had been planted in her mind was already taking root, and she couldn't help but feel like there was something more at play, something bigger than this one interaction. She nudged Xavier awake gently, her hand on his shoulder. "Hey, baby, time to get up. We've arrived." Xavier stretched his arms and blinked sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Are we at Annie's?" Tasha smiled softly, brushing his hair out his face. "Yes, we are. We'll see Annie soon. Just a little more, okay?" The cabin started to empty, passengers moving past them toward the door. Tasha stood, Xavier in tow, and as they made their way toward the front of the plane, she caught another glimpse of the flight attendant. He was standing near the exit, speaking with one of the other crew members, his posture calm and collected. As he turned to glance back at her, their eyes met for a brief moment. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about it that made Tasha's heart race. She couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or maybe it was the way the entire plane had seemed to hinge on the moment he'd stepped in to intervene. What was it about him? She turned away quickly, trying to push the thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to get caught up in this. She had more important things to focus on, like her son and her sister's wedding. But the nagging feeling stayed with her as they exited the plane and made their way through the terminal. Tasha guided Xavier through the crowded airport, but her mind was still elsewhere. She couldn't shake the sense of unease. She found herself glancing around, looking for any sign that might explain what had happened. But nothing stood out. The terminal was bustling with activity, the usual chaos of travelers scrambling to catch their next flights. No one paid them any mind. No one looked twice at the woman and child making their way through the crowd. They stopped at baggage claim to wait for their luggage, and as the conveyor bell hummed, Tasha's thoughts drifted back to the flight. It was then, as she stood waiting, that a soft voice broke through her reverie. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson." Tasha turned, startled, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the flight attendant standing a few feet away. This time, he was out of his uniform, dressed in a sharp suit and tie, his demeanor a stark contrast to the friendly, casual tone he'd had on the plane. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind, and there was a strange familiarity in his gaze. "Yes," Tasha replied, her voice cautious, unsure what was happening. "My name is Tasha Thompson," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'm the flight attendant you had earlier on your flight. If you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you. It's important." Tasha's heart raced again. Thompson? The name echoed in her mind, and a sense of recognition flickered at the back of her mind. This was no coincidence. She was certain of it now. There was something more going on here. She started, but before she could finish, the flight attendant continued, his tone low but urgent. "I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to talk to you. It's about why I intervened with that man earlier." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding back, how much of the tension from the flight still lingered within her. But now, here he was, and he was asking to explain himself. She glanced around, noticing how many people were passing by them. It was hardly the place for a conversation like this. "Can we step outside?" Tasha asked, her voice almost a whisper. There was something about the way he spoke that made her uneasy, something she couldn't quite trust, even if his intentions had seemed good on the flight. The flight attendant nodded, glancing briefly at Xavier before turning to lead the way. Outside the airport, the warm air hit Tasha's skin, and she breathed it in, grateful for the change of atmosphere. It was quieter here, away from the chaos of the terminal. The bright lights from the nearby parking lot cast a soft glow over the area, and the faint hum of passing cars filled the air. "So what is this about?" Tasha asked, her voice steady but her nerves still on edge. The flight attendant paused for a moment, glancing around as if ensuring no one was listening. When he spoke again, his voice was more intense, almost urgent. "I'm not just a flight attendant," he said, his words carefully chosen. "I work for the airline in a much higher capacity than you might think." Tasha frowned, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm part of the leadership team. And if you're wondering about my name," he hesitated for a moment, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm Tasha Thompson, the CEO of this airline. Tasha blinked, shocked by the revelation. She had been right all along. This man, this flight attendant, was not just an employee. He was the person who ran the entire airline. I know this must be a lot to take in, Tasha continued, his tone softer now. But I need you to understand something. What happened on that plane, it was intentional. I've seen enough of what happens in spaces like that, where people are treated differently simply because of who they are. I couldn't let that go. Tasha's head spun. The CEO? The CEO of the airline she had just flown with? She hadn't even begun to process the enormity of the situation. But before she could speak, the man, the CEO, continued. I know this may be hard to understand, he said again, his voice steady and unshaken. But I had to act in that moment. I want to help you in ways that go beyond this flight. I need you to know that I'm committed to making things right. But we need to talk. It's not over. Tasha stood there, unable to speak. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, and the reality of what was happening was slowly beginning to sink in. Tasha stood there, her breath catching in her chest, her mind reeling from the unexpected revelation. The CEO of the airline, this quiet, seemingly ordinary flight attendant, was standing before her, speaking as if their brief exchange had somehow shifted the course of her entire life. Tasha's thoughts jumbled together, struggling to make sense of it all. She had never imagined this kind of encounter, least of all with someone she had thought of as just another employee in an industry that often seemed indifferent to people like her. The CEO, Tasha Thompson, stood in front of her, his expression calm, but the undercurrent of urgency in his voice told her this was more than just a random interaction. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't coincidence. I know this is a lot, Tasha Thompson continued, his eyes scanning the parking lot as though ensuring no one was watching them. But I need you to understand that this isn't just about that man on the plane. This is about something bigger. A system, really. One that I've spent years trying to fight from the inside. Tasha shook her head slightly, trying to catch up. A system? Her voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. What do you mean? What's going on here? He exhaled slowly, his hands folding together as if gathering his thoughts. I'm not just here to apologize for that man's behavior, he said, his voice soft but resolute. That's only the tip of the iceberg. What you experienced, what we both experience every day, goes much deeper than a single passenger or a rude comment. It's about the ways we've been conditioned to accept injustice as normal. It's about the subtle microaggressions, the systemic biases, the daily grind of being marginalized in spaces that should be for everyone. Tasha felt her chest tighten. He was speaking in a way that resonated with her, and yet at the same time, it was impossible to fully absorb. She had experienced these things, the silent treatment, the subtle glances, the condescension. But hearing it put into words by someone who was supposed to be an ally felt like a revelation. She wanted to believe him, but it felt almost too much to trust. I've spent my career at this airline, Tasha Thompson continued, working my way up through every level. I've seen things, heard things, and been complicit in things I'm not proud of. But I won't be part of that system anymore. Not after what happened on that flight. And certainly not after what I've come to learn about myself. Tasha swallowed, her throat dry. What do you mean, yourself? He hesitated, glancing at her for the briefest moment before speaking. My name. It's not just a coincidence that we share it. My father was the founder of this airline, and I grew up in this industry, watching it unfold in ways that I didn't fully understand back then. But now I know. I know what it means to be a part of something so deeply ingrained in the systems of power and privilege. And I've been given the opportunity to change it. I need people like you to help me. The words hung in the air, heavy with the implication of what he was saying. Tasha felt the ground beneath her shift, as though the world she had known for so long was suddenly cracking open, revealing the deep fractures that had always been there, but that she had never been able to see. I'm not sure I understand, Tasha said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Are you asking me to what? Help you fix it? He nodded slowly, his expression hardening with purpose. Yes, but not in the way you think. What happened on that plane was a symptom of a much larger issue. People like you, people who've had to navigate these systems of power, we need to come together. I've spent too many years trying to do this alone, and I've realized that it's not enough. I can't do it by myself anymore. Tasha stepped back slightly, her mind spinning. She could feel the weight of his words pressing in on her, forcing her to confront the reality of her own experiences. She had always assumed that the small moments of disrespect, the subtle dismissals, were just things she had to accept. She'd never truly thought about them in the context of something larger. But now that he was saying it, now that he was pointing out the obvious, it was like a door had opened. But why me? Tasha asked, her voice full of disbelief. What makes you think I can help? I'm just a passenger. I'm just a mother trying to get to her sister's wedding. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto hers with quiet intensity. Because I saw you, Tasha. I saw you standing up for yourself, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I saw the strength in you, even when you were trying not to show it. You're the kind of person I need to help me break this system. You've been part of it too, just like I have. But you know what it's like to be on the other side of it, to be the one who's ignored, dismissed, and belittled. Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't realized it, but he was right. She had spent so many years battling quiet indignities, never fully acknowledging how they had shaped her. She had internalized so much of the oppression, assuming it was just part of the deal, part of life as a black woman in America. I don't know if I can, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is all so much. I'm not ready for this. Tasha Thompson nodded, his expression softening. I know it's overwhelming. I don't expect you to jump in all at once, but I want you to think about it. We can't change anything if we don't try. And right now, I'm trying. I'm asking for your help because I know what it's like to feel powerless in this system. But I also know what it's like to fight back, to take control, and to make change happen. Tasha looked at him, her mind racing. She didn't know what to say, or if she even could say anything. But one thing was certain, this was just the beginning. The sound of a distant airplane taking off broke the silence between them. Tasha's heart thudded in her chest as she looked at Xavier, now standing by her side, watching the exchange with wide eyes. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice steady with quiet resolve. But this is bigger than I thought. Tasha Thompson gave her a small nod. I know, and I'm not asking you to decide now. Just keep it in mind. It's all about the long game. As they stood there in the stillness, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she hadn't yet begun to understand. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of family events and wedding preparations, but Tasha couldn't escape the conversation she'd had with Tasha Thompson. Every time she closed her eyes, the words echoed in her mind. This is about something bigger, a system. Despite the joy of her sister's wedding, a sense of unease gnawed at her, pulling her thoughts back to the strange encounter. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like a door had been opened, one that revealed a side of the world she had never truly considered. She had known about racism. Of course she had. She had felt it sting her entire life. But this was different. The way Tasha Thompson spoke of power, of systems, of the way the airline industry and so many others perpetuated inequality, was unsettling in a way Tasha couldn't put into words. She had heard about powerful people within corporations making systemic changes before, but this felt real, felt like something she couldn't turn away from. But she wasn't ready to jump into something this big. Not yet. She had Xavier to think about, and a life to protect, and sometimes the weight of all the injustice she had faced felt too heavy to carry. Tasha had learned to survive within the system, not to challenge it, and to ask for more seemed like too much. Yet, every time she returned to her thoughts, there was one question that wouldn't leave her. What if she could help? The ringing of her phone startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. The name that flashed back at her made her heart skip. Tasha Thompson. It had only been a few days, but the conversation had still felt raw, like a scar that hadn't yet healed. Hello? Tasha answered, trying to sound casual. Tasha, came the calm, measured voice of the CEO on the other end. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I want to make sure you have all the information you need. There's something I think you should see. Tasha's stomach fluttered. She knew that tone. She knew that it meant business. What do you mean? I'd like to show you what's been happening behind the scenes. I've gathered some documents, data, and a few things that might make you understand the depth of what I've been working on. It's time for a real change, and I'm hoping you'll see the potential for us to make it happen." Tasha hesitated. She didn't want to get involved in something that could backfire, especially with her son in tow. She had always stayed under the radar, quiet, strategic, making sure not to stir the pot too much. But what if this was her chance to actually do something, to make a real difference? "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this information," Tasha replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just a passenger, just a mom trying to make it through the day." "You're more than that, Tasha," the CEO replied. "I know what it's like to feel powerless, but I've been in your shoes. I've been overlooked, dismissed. I've been silenced because of who I am. That's why we need people like you. You understand the system, even if you don't want to." Tasha's breath hitched. The words were too familiar. She did understand, but how far could she go? "Where do you want me to meet you?" she finally asked, her voice a mix of determination and hesitation. "I'll send you the address. Come prepared. It's time to make this right." The phone clicked off, leaving her in the quiet of the hotel room, the world outside buzzing with the chaos of wedding festivities. Tasha stared at the phone for a moment, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but one thing was clear. Tasha Thompson, the CEO of the airline, was not someone to take lightly. The address led Tasha to a sleek building downtown, far from the wedding venue and the life she had known. The building was modern, sharp, with glass panels reflecting the city's lights. Tasha parked in a nearby garage, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. "What am I doing?" When she entered the lobby, the receptionist smiled warmly and gestured toward an elevator. "Ms. Thompson is expecting you. Go on up." The elevator ride felt unnervingly long, and by the time the doors opened on the top floor, Tasha's nerves were on edge. She stepped out into a sleek, corporate office that looked like it belonged to a high-powered, cutthroat world, glass walls, minimalist furniture, and a faint hum of voices in the background. Tasha Thompson was sitting behind a large desk when Tasha entered. He rose as she approached, offering her a firm handshake. His suit was sharp, his demeanor the complete opposite of the man she'd seen on the plane. He looked every bit the part of a powerful CEO. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please have a seat." Tasha took a seat across from him, still feeling a bit out of place. "What exactly is going on here?" The CEO smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone looking for approval. It was a smile of someone who had already decided what needed to be done. "I told you before," he began, "this isn't about one bad flight. This is about an entire system that's been built to keep people like you and me in our place. My father built this airline, and he built it with a specific vision in mind. One where people like us were always on the outside, always overlooked. I've spent my career working within that framework, trying to change it from the inside. But it's clear now that change won't come from within alone. I need people like you to help me tear it down from the outside." Tasha's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you want me to do?" Tasha Thompson leaned forward, his eyes focused. "I need you to join me. I need your perspective, your experience, and your knowledge. I can't do this alone. If you can stand with me, we can expose everything. The hidden practices, the discrimination, the biased systems that keep us at the bottom. Together, we can change the narrative." Tasha was silent for a moment, her mind racing. The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Could she really do this? Could she risk everything, including her own career, for this fight? But as she looked at the man before her, his eyes full of determination, something deep within her stirred. She couldn't keep walking the same path, could she? "I'll help," she said, the words coming out stronger than she expected. "I don't know what this will look like, but I'll help." Tasha Thompson's face softened, a look of quiet relief washing over him. "I knew I could count on you. Together, we'll make this right." Tasha took a deep breath. This was the moment, the beginning of something that could change everything. But she also knew that every change came with a cost, and she was about to find out what that cost would be. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, emails, and endless paperwork. Tasha felt like she was walking in a fog, part of something bigger, but still trying to find her footing. The enormity of what she had agreed to was starting to hit her in small waves, moments when the weight of the decision would settle over her like a blanket of ice. Yet, there was something strangely invigorating about it, too. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was actually doing something, fighting back against the things that had always held her back. But the stakes were higher than she had anticipated. The more she learned about Tasha Thompson's efforts to expose the systemic racism within the airline, the more she realized just how deep the roots went. She had already started sifting through some of the company's internal reports, uncovering instances of discriminatory hiring practices, biased promotions, and even covert policies that marginalize employees of color. Tasha had been shocked when she first saw the evidence. She had always suspected it. But to see it laid bare in black and white was a different thing entirely. And the worst part? She had known many of the people involved, people who were her colleagues, people she had trusted, people she never thought would perpetuate this kind of system. But there was no turning back now. One afternoon, as Tasha reviewed a set of employee testimonials, she received a message from Tasha Thompson asking her to meet at a small, upscale restaurant downtown. The CEO had mentioned that he wanted to discuss their next steps, but something in his tone made her uneasy. He hadn't mentioned anything about the documents or any progress on the plan to confront the higher-ups. His vague message left her with a sense of dread, a nagging feeling that they were about to take things to a new, more dangerous level. Arriving at the restaurant, she found a small corner booth where Tasha Thompson was already seated, his dark eyes scanning the room as if looking for something or someone. When he saw her, he gestured for her to join him. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice warm. But there was an edge to it, a subtle tension beneath the surface. Tasha took her seat across from him, noting the way he carefully avoided her gaze. It felt odd, and she couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. Was there something he wasn't telling her? "I've been going through some things," he said, his voice low. "There's something I think you need to see." Tasha's heart skipped. She had seen enough already. The documentation, the testimonies, the damning evidence. She didn't need to be shown anything else. But Tasha Thompson's expression was so serious that she couldn't ignore it. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious. He pulled a folder from a bag beside him, sliding it across the table. Tasha hesitated for a moment before reaching for it. Her fingers brushed against the smooth paper, and she felt a flicker of unease ripple through her. She opened the folder slowly, her breath catching when she saw the contents. Inside were more reports, more documents, but these weren't just about the airline's discriminatory practices. These were about something far more personal. Tasha felt her stomach drop as she scanned the page. It was a list of names, employees, including her own, who had been flagged for further review. The reason? Suspected sympathies for social justice movements. Her name was at the top of the list. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Tasha Thompson looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's a list of people within the company who are considered troublemakers, those who have the potential to disrupt the status quo, people who might challenge the system." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. This was worse than she had imagined. She had always known that the company had ways of silencing employees, both directly and indirectly. But to be on a list like this, to be marked as a threat simply because she had been speaking out about the things she had seen, it was terrifying. "What does this mean?" Tasha whispered, her voice hoarse. "It means they've been watching you," Tasha Thompson replied quietly. "And now that you're involved with me, they'll be watching both of us." Tasha leaned back in her seat, trying to process everything. She had felt the subtle pushback from some of the higher-ups in the company, but this was different. This was a clear message. They were coming for her. "I thought we were going to change things from the inside," Tasha said, her voice low, filled with disbelief. "How are we supposed to do that if they already have us marked? If they're watching everything we do?" Tasha Thompson's expression hardened. "We can't change anything if we don't confront it head-on. They want us to be scared. They want us to back down. But that's not how change happens. You've already shown that you're not afraid to stand up to people like that man on the plane. You've shown you have the courage. Now, we just need to take it a step further." Tasha felt the weight of his words settle over her. This was real. This wasn't just about fixing things for herself or for her son. This was bigger than that. They weren't just up against a few bad apples. They were up against an entire system, a system that was built to silence people like her. "You're asking me to go public," Tasha said slowly, "to put everything on the line. My job, my reputation, my family. "I'm asking you to fight for something more," he replied. "This isn't just about your job or mine. This is about changing the way the world works for people like you and me. This is about fighting for the future, not just surviving in the present." Tasha's heart raced as she processed everything he had just said. She thought about her son, about Xavier, and the future she wanted to create for him. She thought about the legacy of people like her, who had fought for change even when it seemed impossible. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, her mind made up. "I'll do whatever it takes." Tasha Thompson gave her a small nod, a glimmer of relief crossing his features. "Good. Then it's time to take this fight to the next level. Together." The decision to join Tasha Thompson in his fight for justice felt like stepping into a new world, one that was both daunting and exhilarating. After their conversation, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had known was about to change. Her every move, every action, would now carry consequences. She wasn't just a mother trying to make a living anymore. She was a player in a much larger game. The days that followed were filled with late-night meetings, strategic planning, and a steady unraveling of the corporate world she had once trusted. She sat in sterile boardrooms with Tasha Thompson and a select few of his allies, listening as they mapped out their next steps. They discussed everything from public awareness campaigns to internal memos that would expose the systemic issues within the company. They spoke with a sense of urgency that made her stomach tighten, but there was also a fire in their voices. They had all seen the problem. They all understood the stakes. One afternoon, Tasha found herself sitting in the same office where she had met with Thompson earlier. This time, the atmosphere was different, quieter, more intimate. Thompson had asked her to come alone to discuss the next phase of their plan. "I'm glad you're here," Thompson said, his voice calm but laden with the weight of the situation. "We're on the verge of something big. The media is starting to pay attention, and the company is feeling the heat. But we need more. We need allies in higher places." Tasha's mind raced as she listened to his words. She had known this day would come, the day when they would push back against the powers that be. But she wasn't sure how much further she was willing to go. She had agreed to help, to be a part of this movement. But the idea of going public, of taking on the full force of corporate machine, felt overwhelming. "What do you mean by allies?" she asked, her voice steady despite the swirling unease in her chest. "We need people on the inside to help us," Thompson replied, his gaze sharp. "We've identified a few key individuals who could be invaluable to our cause. People in the legal department, HR, and even some who sit on the board. But it's a delicate operation. We need to approach it carefully. One wrong move, and we could all be exposed." Tasha felt the weight of his words sink in. This wasn't just about fighting one man on a plane anymore. This was about taking down a system, a powerful, entrenched system that had been operating under the radar for far too long. "Do you trust these people?" she asked, her voice quiet but probing. Thompson hesitated, then nodded. "I trust some of them, but we can't be naive. The closer we get to the heart of the company, the more dangerous it becomes. We'll be stepping on toes, and some of those toes are connected to people who will do anything to protect their power." Tasha's stomach churned. She had known it would be hard, but she hadn't realized just how far-reaching the fight would be. She had been focused on the smaller injustices, the ones you could see and touch. But now she was looking at a sprawling empire of discrimination, one that stretched beyond the airline's walls. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm. "But I need to know everything. I need to understand who I'm really up against." Thompson smiled, a thin, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll make sure you have all the information you need. But for now, it's time to start taking action. We'll be releasing our first report to the media soon, and I want you to be ready for the backlash. Once the story breaks, everything changes." Tasha nodded, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had known there would be consequences, but now it felt real. She was no longer just a passive observer. She was an active participant in a battle that would change the course of her life and the lives of many others. As the meeting concluded, Thompson handed her a file, one that was heavier than it appeared. Inside, she found detailed accounts of the airline's discriminatory practices, names of key executives involved in the cover-up, and a strategy for how they would leak this information to the press. The plan was bold, but it was also dangerous. There was no going back now. Tasha stood up, feeling the weight of the file in her hands. She couldn't ignore the feeling of responsibility that settled over her, but she couldn't ignore the fire that had been kindled inside her either. This was her chance to make a real difference. "I'll do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm ready." Thompson's eyes softened for a moment, but the seriousness in his expression didn't falter. "We're doing this together, Tasha, every step of the way." As she left the office, Tasha's mind spun with the enormity of what was ahead. She was about to be part of something that could bring down one of the most powerful companies in the world, and the risks were higher than she had ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. In the following days, Tasha and Thompson worked tirelessly, fine-tuning their strategy and preparing for the release of the report. They knew the media would scrutinize every detail, and they needed to be ready for fallout. It wasn't just about exposing the airline's wrongdoings. It was about igniting a movement that would change the way businesses treated their employees, particularly those from marginalized communities. Tasha spent her evenings reading through the reports, her eyes scanning the pages as the weight of the words settled over her like a heavy cloak. It was overwhelming. The amount of injustice, the years of mistreatment, and the corporate indifference. It was enough to break anyone. But Tasha knew that this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced for far too long. By the time the report was ready, Tasha had made peace with the fear that had been gnawing at her. She had come this far, and now she had to see it through. The morning of the release, Tasha sat at her kitchen table, the document open before her, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that once the story hit, everything would change. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Thompson. "It's time." With one final breath, Tasha hit send. The moment Tasha hit send, she felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest like a drum. The decision to go public with the report was now irreversible. The email had gone out, the press release was circulating, and the allegations were out in the open. The hidden truths about the airline's systemic discrimination, the wrongful treatment of employees of color, the biased hiring practices, everything was now exposed, and there was no going back. The fallout was immediate. Tasha's phone began to buzz incessantly, her inbox filled with responses from journalists, board members, and employees alike. The media had already picked up the story, and soon the world would be watching the airline's every move. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through the messages. Some were supportive, urging her to keep going. Others were hostile, accusing her of trying to destroy the company. But the message that stood out was one that came from Tasha Thompson. "We need to talk." Now, her stomach churned. She knew the moment was coming, the moment when the full force of what they had done would come crashing down. But she wasn't prepared for what happened next. That afternoon, Tasha received a call from her old supervisor at the airline. His voice was shaky, almost panicked. "Tasha," he said, his words rushed, "we need to talk. This isn't just about the report anymore. They're coming for you. The company's not going to let this go. You need to make a decision fast." Tasha's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I did what I had to do. You saw what was going on. You know what we've been fighting against." Her supervisor's voice dropped lower, a whisper now. "You think you're fighting for justice? The company has already moved against you. They've flagged you, Tasha. They know you're behind this. You're a threat now. They're going to use everything they can against you. And I don't think I can protect you anymore." The words hit her like a blow. She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. It was one thing to expose the company's wrongdoing. It was another to become the target of its retaliation. The corporate machine was far more ruthless than she had imagined. The fact that her supervisor, someone who had once been an ally, was now distancing himself from her felt like a betrayal she hadn't expected. "You can't be serious," she said, trying to steady her voice. "You knew this was coming. We're on the right side of this." "I know," he he replied. But the company, it's bigger than us. They've got too much power, too many people in high places, and you're about to be in the crosshairs. The line went silent for a moment, and Tasha could hear the tension in his breath. What do I do? She asked quietly. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm sorry. I can't be part of this anymore. I've been told to stay out of it, to avoid the spotlight. And if you don't back down, if you keep going, you're going to lose everything. Your career, your reputation, your life as you know it. I wish I could help, but I can't. I'm sorry. The call ended abruptly, leaving Tasha in stunned silence. Her phone slipped from her hand, landing with a soft thud on the table. The betrayal was sharp, cutting deeper than anything she had experienced in her life. This wasn't just a corporate enemy. This was personal. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with the weight of the situation. She had known that standing up for what was right would come with consequences. But this, the sudden coldness from people she thought she could trust, it hit harder than any threat the company could have made. As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Tasha Thompson. The board is going to make a statement. They're calling you a liability. They've already sent out a memo to the media discrediting the report. They're going to bury us unless we do something fast. We need to meet. Tonight, Tasha's pulse quickened. The corporate machine was moving quickly now, and it was clear they weren't going to let this go. They had underestimated her, and now they were coming for her with everything they had. The question was she prepared to fight back? Later that night, Tasha met with Thompson in a small, dimly lit office in the heart of downtown. He looked as worn as she felt, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a hard edge. There was no more room for niceties. The battle had officially begun. They're coming for both of us, Thompson said, his voice low, and they'll do whatever it takes to destroy us. The board has already started spreading lies about the report. They've called it fabricated, biased. They're trying to paint us as opportunists trying to ruin the company's reputation for our own gain. You and I are both on the chopping block. Tasha felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had expected resistance, but this was a full-on attack. And the worst part? She couldn't even trust her own colleagues anymore. The people who had once seemed like allies, who had shared in the same frustrations, were now distancing themselves. The company had their claws in too deep. They can't just erase the truth, Tasha said, her voice trembling but resolute. We have the proof. We have the records. We can't let them win this. Thompson leaned forward, his eyes intense. I agree, but it's not just about the facts anymore. It's about survival. They're going to do everything they can to ruin us. We need to move faster. We need to make our move before they can bury us completely. We can't wait any longer. Tasha nodded, feeling a surge of determination rise within her. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about fighting for their lives, for their futures, for the futures of everyone who had ever been oppressed by the system they were now trying to dismantle. As she looked at Thompson, she knew that the battle ahead would be fierce. But she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. We're in this together, she said, her voice steady. And I'm not giving up. Thompson gave her a small nod. Neither am I. The storm had arrived. Tasha could feel it in the air. The backlash had come faster than she anticipated, and now the media was buzzing with the company's rebuttal of the allegations. The board had issued a statement discrediting the report, calling it baseless and politically motivated, claiming that it was nothing more than a smear campaign. They had started spreading lies, putting the blame on her and Thompson, positioning them as disgruntled employees trying to tear down the very institution that had given them opportunities. But the real fight had yet to begin. Tasha stood outside the corporate headquarters, her palms sweating as she stared at the imposing glass building before her. The night was thick with tension, the city lights reflecting off the building's sleek exterior. She could almost feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Inside, the company's top executives were preparing to meet with her. This was it. This would be her confrontation with the people who had been complicit in the very systems she had fought against for so long. The people who had turned a blind eye to the injustice that had run rampant in the airline for decades. Tasha had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the cold, calculating looks she would face from those in power. As she stepped inside, she was escorted to a private meeting room where the board of directors was already waiting. Tasha Thompson, the CEO, was seated at the head of the table, his expression hard as stone. The moment she entered, the room fell silent. The air was thick with hostility and power, and Tasha could feel every set of eyes on her. Ms. Thompson, one of the board members began, a man in his late 50s with a sharp, hawkish gaze. You've caused quite a stir. What you've done is not only irresponsible, it's reckless. You've endangered the reputation of this company, its employees, and its shareholders. Tasha stood tall, unflinching. She had anticipated the blame game, but hearing it in person, directed at her, still felt like a punch to the gut. I haven't endangered anyone. I've simply told the truth. What's reckless is perpetuating a system of inequality and silence. Her voice was steady, though the words fell heavy on her tongue. The room was tense, and she could feel their disdain as they scrutinized her every move. The board member scoffed, leaning forward. And now you expect us to believe that this entire company, this institution, is corrupt? That everyone in this room is complicit in some grand conspiracy to keep people of color down? Do you even understand the damage you've done? Tasha's chest tightened. The man's words were a calculated attack, but they didn't land the way he wanted them to. She had lived this reality for so long. Now she was determined to expose it for what it was. You don't get to define what's damaging, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. You've been complicit in maintaining a system that pushes people to margins. And now, you want to turn this around and make it look like I'm the problem? No. The damage was done long before I ever raised my voice. The room grew quiet for a moment, and Tasha could feel the weight of their scrutiny. They were uncomfortable now, unsure how to respond to someone who wasn't backing down, someone who was afraid to call them out. Tasha Thompson, the CEO, remained silent as the tension in the room mounted. She had been eerily calm ever since the meeting had started, and for a moment, Tasha wondered what he was thinking. Finally, he spoke, his voice level and firm. Enough, he said, his tone cutting through the quiet like a blade. I know what's at stake here. We're not here to play games. But the truth is, we're in a position where every word, every action could either make or break this company. And if this gets out of hand, we'll lose everything. Everything we worked for. He turned his gaze toward the board members. If you want to maintain this illusion of perfection, if you want to keep sweeping things under the rug, I'll walk away right now. I'll leave, and I'll take everything down with me. There was a heavy pause. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Tasha thought he might actually walk out. But instead, he sat back, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face her again. We have one shot at this, Thompson continued, his voice calm but filled with the gravity of the situation. We can either work together to fix the damage, or we can burn this company to the ground. But we have to act now. We can't afford to play nice anymore. Tasha stared at him, trying to read his expression, unsure if he was truly with her or if this was just another manipulation. But the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was in this fight for real. He had been a part of the system, but now he was ready to break it apart. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly shaken by the intensity of the situation. Finally, the hawkish board member spoke again, his tone more subdued this time. What do you want us to do? He asked, his voice lacking the previous venom. I want the truth to be acknowledged, Tasha replied, her voice steady. I want this company to take responsibility for the harm it's caused and commit to real change. Change that affects everyone, not just the people at the top. If we're going to move forward, we need transparency, accountability, and equality. And that starts with all of us. There was a long silence as the board members absorbed her words, their faces unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable. Tasha knew that this wasn't going to be resolved in one meeting, but she was ready for the fight. She had nothing to lose. We'll begin an internal review, the hawkish board member said reluctantly, his voice lacking conviction. But don't expect this to be easy. You're asking us to dismantle everything we've built. I'm not asking you to dismantle everything, Tasha said firmly. I'm asking you to build something better. something that we can all be proud of. The room was silent again, but this time it felt different. There was a crack in their walls, a chink in their armor. Tasha could feel it. "Get back to me," she said, standing up. "I'll be waiting for your answer." As she left the room, Tasha felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she had taken the first step toward the change she had always dreamed of, and now there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of media coverage, public protests, and legal battles. The airline, once so secure in its power, now found itself under an unrelenting spotlight. Every day brought new revelations, new voices joining the chorus of those demanding accountability. But despite the mounting pressure, there was something undeniably satisfying about watching the company crumble bit by bit. Tasha sat in her small apartment, her eyes glued to the television screen. The news coverage was relentless. The airline stock was plummeting, and the media was covering every aspect of the corruption that had been exposed. She couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph, even as the weight of what she had sacrificed pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had lost her job. Her reputation in the industry was tarnished beyond repair, and the company's retaliation was swift and unforgiving. But she had done it. She had brought the truth to light. She had stood up and fought when everyone else had remained silent. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. Tasha glanced at the screen. It was a text from Thompson. "We did it. The company is going down. But it's not over. We have to finish what we started. Meet me tonight." Her heart raced as she stood up, pulling on her jacket. She had known that the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, more than ever, she was ready to see this fight through to the end. That evening, Tasha met Thompson at a small, quiet bar downtown. It was a place away from the prying eyes of the media, a place where they could talk without fear of being overheard. As she entered, she spotted him in the corner, his eyes scanning the room, always alert. He nodded as she approached, and she sat down across from him. "You look exhausted," Thompson remarked, his voice quiet but full of concern. Tasha shrugged, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "It's been a hell of a few weeks, but it's worth it. Seeing everything start to fall apart. It's like watching a house of cards crumble." Thompson smiled, but it was a rare, bittersweet smile. "It's been a long time coming. I've spent my whole career in this industry, and now we've finally cracked the system open. It's more than just about the airline. This is about changing the entire industry, about making sure people like you and me never have to fight for our place again." Tasha nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The impact of what they had done wasn't just personal. It was a statement. It was a challenge to the entire corporate world, to every system that had been built on inequality and oppression. But even as she basked in the glow of their small victory, Tasha knew that it came with a cost. She had lost her career, her status. She had lost her place in a world that had promised so much more. There were days when she felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, days when she wondered if the fight was truly worth the sacrifices. But then she would remember the faces of the people who had stood by her, the people who had been empowered by the truth they had uncovered. She would remember her son, Xavier, and the world she was building for him. The cost was high, but it was the only way forward. "We're not done yet," Thompson said, his voice firm. "The company's scrambling to put out the fire, but they can't undo what we've done. There are lawsuits, investigations, and the media's not letting up. We've started a movement, Tasha, and now it's time to finish what we started." Tasha's gaze hardened as she met his eyes. "I'm in. Let's finish this." Thompson leaned forward, his voice lowering. "We need to push for real change. We need to take this fight to Washington. We need to make sure this kind of corporate corruption doesn't happen again. We need laws that protect people, laws that prevent discrimination from thriving in corporate America." Tasha felt a rush of adrenaline. The fight was far from over, and now it was clear that the next phase would be even bigger than the last. "I'm ready. Let's take them down." "All the way." Thompson smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I knew you were the right person for this. Together we can make history." As they continued to discuss their plans, Tasha's phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a notification that sent a chill down her spine. Breaking news. Former airline CEO and board members facing legal action following whistleblower report. The message sent a jolt of excitement through her. It was happening. The airline's former leadership was being held accountable. Lawsuits, investigations. This was the beginning of their downfall. "We did it," Tasha whispered, the words almost surreal. Thompson nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, but this is just the beginning. Now, we make sure they never get away with this again." Tasha felt a sense of calm wash over her. The fight had been long, and it had been painful, but in this moment, she knew that the battle had been worth it. The truth was out, the change had begun, and the system that had oppressed her and so many others was finally being dismantled. There was no going back now. They had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. But Tasha didn't want to turn back. She was ready for whatever came next. This was her victory, and it was only the beginning.